I stood under the bright lights of a packed charity gala as a giant screen behind me displayed a number that made the crowd gasp. $100 million. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. But I wasn't looking at any of them. I was staring at two people sitting near the front row. My parents. Years ago, when I was drowning in grief and raising infant twins alone, they walked away without looking back. Tonight, they had come expecting to celebrate my success. Instead, they were about to learn where every dollar was going. The day they abandoned us, they thought they left behind a burden. They were wrong. There was a time when my life felt wonderfully ordinary. My wife, Emily, and I weren't rich. We didn't own a mansion or drive luxury cars. We lived in a comfortable house on the edge of town, paid our bills on time, and spent our weekends planning for the future. To us, that was more than enough. The center of our world was our newborn twins, Noah and Lily. The day they were born, everything changed in the best possible way. Sleep became rare, free time disappeared, and our house was constantly filled with the sounds of crying, laughing, and tiny feet kicking against blankets. Yet neither of us would have traded it for anything. My parents lived only 20 minutes away. At family dinners, they proudly showed pictures of the twins to friends and neighbors. My mother constantly called them her little miracles. My father joked about teaching Noah baseball and spoiling Lily with ice cream before she was old enough to tell her parents. Back then, I truly believed my children would grow up surrounded by love. Emily loved watching those moments. She often sat quietly during family gatherings, smiling as my parents held the babies and argued over who got to babysit first. Whenever she caught me looking at her, she'd smile and say, "They're lucky to have so many people who love them." I believed that too. Then, just when life seemed settled, everything changed. Emily started feeling tired all the time. At first, we blamed the sleepless nights that come with caring for newborns. But weeks passed, and instead of getting better, she grew weaker. Doctor appointments turned into specialist visits. Specialist visits turned into hospital tests. The smiles slowly disappeared from her home. One afternoon, after a long appointment, Emily sat beside me in the parking lot, holding a folder of medical results in trembling hands. I remember looking at her and seeing fear in her eyes for the very first time. And in that moment, I realized a storm was coming toward our family, one neither of us was prepared to face. The diagnosis arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. Emily and I sat across from a specialist who spoke gently, carefully choosing every word. I don't remember most of what he said. I only remember the look on Emily's face as she squeezed my hand. Fear. Real fear. The kind that settles deep inside your chest and refuses to leave. For the next several months, our lives became a cycle of hospital visits, treatments, medications, and endless hope. Every good day felt like a victory. Every setback felt like a punch to the stomach. Through it all, Emily fought harder than anyone I had ever known. She smiled for the twins even when she was exhausted. She read bedtime stories from a recliner when she was too weak to stand. She insisted on celebrating every tiny milestone Noah and Lily reached. "Promise me something," she whispered one night while we sat beside the twins' cribs. "Anything. No matter what happens, make sure they always know they're loved." I wrapped my arm around her and told her she would be there to tell them herself. I wanted to believe it. A few weeks later, reality proved otherwise. The call came just after midnight. By sunrise, my entire world had fallen apart. Emily was gone. One day, I was a husband and father. The next, I was a widower standing in a silent house with two babies who had no idea their mother would never come home. The days that followed were a blur. Funeral arrangements, paperwork, condolences, sleepless nights. I barely remembered to eat. Some mornings I couldn't even remember what day it was. Every time I looked at Noah and Lily, my heart broke all over again. They needed me, but I was barely holding myself together. So I did what most people would do. I turned to my parents. They were family. They loved the twins. They had always promised they'd be there. At least, that's what I believed. Sitting at their kitchen table one evening, completely exhausted, I finally asked for help. Just a little help. A few hours of babysitting. Some support while I got back on my feet. My mother stared at her coffee. My father exchanged a glance with her. And suddenly, the room felt colder than before. My father leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. For a moment, nobody spoke. The ticking clock on the kitchen wall seemed unusually loud. Finally, my mother sighed. "How long are you expecting us to do this?" she asked. I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The babysitting. The constant help. The emergencies." I stared at her. "I don't know. Just until I can get things under control." Another uncomfortable silence followed. Then my father shook his head. "That's not going to work for us." I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "We already raised our children," he said flatly. "We're not interested in raising another generation." "I'm not asking you to raise them." That's exactly what it sounds like. The words hit harder than I expected. I looked from my father to my mother, waiting for her to disagree. She didn't. Instead, she stared down at her coffee cup. My chest tightened. "Mom," she finally looked up. "We love the twins, but this isn't the retirement we planned." Retirement. That word echoed in my mind. My wife had been gone less than 2 months. I was barely sleeping, barely functioning, and they were worried about retirement. "I just need some help," I said quietly. "A few afternoons, maybe an occasional weekend." My father's expression hardened. "You made your choices." I felt my stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "It means those children are your responsibility, not ours." The drive home felt endless. When I pulled into the driveway, Noah and Lily were asleep in their car seats. I sat there for several minutes staring through the windshield. Part of me kept expecting my phone to ring, for my mother to call and apologize, for my father to reconsider. The call never came. Days turned into weeks. The visit stopped. The phone call stopped. Birthday invitations went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Slowly, painfully, I realized they hadn't just refused to help. They had chosen to walk away completely. One night, after putting the twins to bed, I sat on the living room floor between their cribs. Noah reached out and wrapped his tiny fingers around mine. Lily smiled in her sleep. Tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I understood the truth. I wasn't grieving one loss. I was grieving 3. The next year was the hardest year of my life. Every day felt like a marathon I hadn't trained for. The twins woke up several times each night. Some mornings, I managed only 2 or 3 hours of sleep before logging into work. I learned how to prepare bottles with one hand while answering emails with the other. Laundry piled up. Dishes filled the sink. Medical bills arrived faster than I could pay them. I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. The streaming subscriptions disappeared first. Then the gym membership. Then weekend takeout meals. I even sold my motorcycle, something I'd dreamed of owning since college. Every dollar mattered. There were nights when I sat at the kitchen table staring at spreadsheets, wondering how much longer I could keep everything together. Sometimes the loneliness felt heavier than the financial stress. The house was quiet after the twins fell asleep. Too quiet. Emily's favorite chair remained empty. Her coffee mug stayed untouched in the cabinet. Every room carried memories. More than once, I found myself sitting in the dark wondering if I was strong enough to do this alone. Then Noah would laugh. Or Lily would reach for me, with her tiny hands. And somehow, I would find enough strength for another day. One evening, after finally getting both twins asleep, I sat between their cribs and watched them dream peacefully. The room was lit only by a small nightlight. I looked at them and made a promise. "No matter what happens," I whispered, "I'll never leave you. You'll never wonder whether your dad showed up." The twins slept through my promise, but I meant every word. For the first time in months, I felt a small sense of determination replacing the grief. I didn't know how I would build a future for us. I only knew I had to keep moving forward. Then, a few days later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in years. It was Michael, an old friend from college. And that unexpected phone call was about to change everything. Michael and I had been close friends in college, but life had pulled us in different directions after graduation. We exchanged the occasional holiday message, but we hadn't had a real conversation in years. "Gerald, it's been too long," he said after I answered. Hearing a familiar voice felt strangely comforting. We spent a few minutes catching up before he asked how I was doing. For a moment, I considered giving the usual answer. "Fine. Busy. Getting by." Instead, I told him the truth. I told him about Emily, about the twins, about my parents disappearing when I needed them most. Michael listened quietly. When I finished, he was silent for several seconds. "You're carrying all of that by yourself?" "Pretty much." "Not anymore." A week later, Michael showed up at my house. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were Emily's parents, Robert and Susan. The moment Susan saw the twins, tears filled her eyes. She immediately pulled both children into a hug. "We should have come sooner," she whispered. From that day forward, everything started changing. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily. Robert began stopping by after work to help around the house. Susan volunteered to watch the twins whenever I needed extra hours for work. They brought groceries, cooked meals, helped with doctor appointments. Most importantly, they reminded me that I wasn't alone. For the first time since Emily's passing, the house felt alive again. Noah and Lily adored them. Every visit became an adventure. Cookie baking in the kitchen, story time on the couch, trips to the park. The twins laughed more than they had in months. And honestly, so did I. One evening after dinner, Robert and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset while the twins played in the yard. "You've done an incredible job," he said. I shook my head. "I'm just surviving." "No," he replied. "You're building something. You just can't see it yet." Then he handed me a folder. Inside were documents, property maps, and business reports. "I've been thinking about an opportunity," he said. "A ranch investment. Small right now, but I think it could become something special." I had no idea that opening that folder would change the course of our lives forever. Spent the next several weeks studying every page in Robert's folder. The opportunity centered around a struggling ranch several hours outside the city. Years earlier, it had been profitable, but poor management and rising costs had pushed it close to failure. Most investors saw it as a risky gamble. Robert saw potential. More importantly, he believed I could see it too. "I wouldn't suggest this if I didn't think you could handle it," he told me. At first, I wasn't convinced. My savings were limited. I had 2 young children depending on me. The idea of investing what little security I had into a ranch felt reckless. But the more research I did, the more I realized Robert might be right. The land itself was valuable. The location was improving. And with the right management, the operation could become profitable again. After weeks of careful planning, I made the decision. I invested. Not everything I had. Just enough to take a chance. Then I got to work. My days were already packed with parenting and my regular job, so most of the ranch work happened late at night after Noah and Lily were asleep. I reviewed financial records, studied livestock markets, spoke with agricultural consultants, learned everything I could. For nearly 2 years, progress came slowly. There were setbacks, unexpected expenses, long nights filled with doubt. More than once, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But every challenge taught me something new, and little by little the ranch improved. Revenue increased. Operations became more efficient. Customers returned. Then something unexpected happened. A major development project was announced near the surrounding area. Almost overnight, interest in nearby land exploded. Property values began climbing. Investors who had ignored the ranch suddenly started paying attention. The same people who once called it a bad investment now wanted meetings. For the first time, I could see a future that wasn't defined by survival. Meanwhile, Noah and Lily were growing up. They helped feed animals during visits, ran through open fields laughing, and turned every trip into an adventure. Watching them thrive made every sacrifice worth it. Then one morning, I opened an email that left me speechless. A national investment group wanted to discuss acquiring part of the ranch operation, and their opening offer was bigger than anything I had ever imagined. The investment group's email was only the beginning. Over the next several months, everything seemed to accelerate. Meetings turned into negotiations. Negotiations turned into partnerships. And partnerships opened doors I never knew existed. The ranch continued growing far beyond what I had imagined when I first signed those papers at my kitchen table years earlier. What impressed people wasn't just the land. It was the business model. We had modernized operations, improved efficiency, and built long-term relationships with customers who valued quality and consistency. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worrying about whether I could pay next month's bills. I was planning years ahead. Yet despite the success, I tried to keep life simple. The twins remained my priority. Noah had become curious about everything. He asked endless questions and wanted to understand how every machine worked. Lily was different. She loved people. She remembered names, listened carefully, and somehow made friends wherever she went. Watching them grow filled me with pride. They were kind, responsible, grateful. Exactly the kind of people Emily would have wanted them to become. Meanwhile, Robert and Susan never changed. Even as the business expanded, they remained the same loving grandparents who had stood beside us when we had nothing. They never asked for money, never expected rewards. They simply showed up. That meant more to me than they would ever know. As media attention increased, reporters began reaching out. Articles were written about the ranch's turnaround story. Business magazines requested interviews. Industry conferences invited me to speak. Suddenly, people who had never heard my name wanted to know how I had built such success. What they didn't know was that every achievement had started with 2 sleeping babies and a promise made in a dark nursery years earlier. Then one afternoon, while preparing for another interview, I received a message that stopped me cold. The sender's name was familiar, a name I hadn't seen in years. My mother. The message was short. "We heard you've been doing very well. Your father and I would love to see you and the twins." After years of silence, my parents had finally decided to come back. And something told me it wasn't because they missed us. For several minutes, I stared at my mother's message without replying. After years of silence, she suddenly wanted to reconnect. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened. Just a casual request to see me and the twins. I wasn't surprised. The interviews, articles, and business coverage had made the ranch difficult to ignore. People knew my name now. And, apparently, my parents had noticed too. A week later, I agreed to meet them at a local restaurant. Part of me wanted answers. Part of me simply wanted to see whether they felt any regret. When I arrived with Noah and Lily, my parents were already seated. The moment they saw the twins, they stood and smiled. "Oh my goodness, look how big they've gotten," my mother exclaimed. My father immediately started asking about school, hobbies, and sports. The twins answered politely, but they were cautious. After all, these were practically strangers. Over lunch, my parents acted as if no time had passed. They laughed, shared stories, asked about the business, asked about the ranch, asked about future expansion plans. What they didn't ask about was Emily. They didn't ask how difficult those early years had been. They didn't ask how I survived after being left alone. And they certainly didn't apologize. The omission was impossible to ignore. As the meal continued, the conversation became increasingly focused on money. My father wanted details about land values. My mother asked about recent partnerships. They seemed unusually interested in every financial aspect of my life. Finally, near the end of lunch, my mother smiled warmly. "We should start having regular family dinners again." I nodded politely. "Maybe." My father leaned forward. "Families should stick together, especially when things are going well." There it was. Not when things were hard. Not when I was grieving. Not when I was raising infant twins alone. When things were going well. The twins exchanged a quick glance. Even they seemed to notice the strange tone of the conversation. As we prepared to leave, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. "We've missed a lot of years, son." I looked at him carefully. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. Then he added one more sentence. "Maybe you can help us with a situation we've been dealing with." And suddenly, Their real reason for returning became painfully obvious. The following week, my parents came to my house. They arrived carrying gifts for Noah and Lily, smiling as though they had been involved grandparents all along. The twins thanked them politely, but I could tell they felt uncomfortable. You can't build a relationship through presence alone. Not after years of absence. After a few minutes of small talk, my mother finally brought up the reason for their visit. "We've had some financial difficulties," she said carefully. I remained silent. My father cleared his throat. The retirement investments didn't work out the way we expected. There it was. The real conversation. Not family. Not reconciliation. Money. They explained how several investments had lost value. There had been unexpected expenses, poor decisions, and growing debt. As they spoke, I found myself remembering different moments. The nights I sat awake wondering how to pay bills. The days I pushed a stroller while searching for extra work. The countless times I had called them hoping for support. Calls they never returned. My mother leaned forward. "We aren't asking for charity." I almost laughed at the irony. "Then what are you asking for?" "A loan," my father answered quickly. "A temporary one." The amount he mentioned was substantial, far more than most people would casually request. I listened without interrupting. When they finished, the room fell silent. Finally, I spoke. "I'm not going to do that." Their expressions changed immediately. My mother's smile disappeared. My father frowned. "Why not?" he asked. I looked directly at him. "Because when I needed help, you chose not to be there." My mother sighed dramatically. "That was years ago." "Yes," I replied. "It was." My father crossed his arms. Families shouldn't hold grudges. The statement stunned me. A grudge? Was that what they thought this was? I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't seeking revenge. I simply remembered the truth. "You had every right to make your choices," I said calmly. "And now I'm making mine." Neither of them liked that answer. The conversation ended shortly afterward. As I watched them drive away, I felt surprisingly peaceful. For years, I had wondered whether their return would heal old wounds. Instead, it revealed something important. They hadn't come back because they missed us. They had come back because they needed something. And for the first time, I no longer felt guilty for seeing the difference. The months following that conversation brought even bigger changes. Interest in the ranch continued growing, and what had started as a small investment years earlier had become one of the most valuable properties in the region. At first, companies wanted partnerships. Then they wanted ownership stakes. Eventually, they wanted the entire operation. One afternoon, I sat in a conference room overlooking the ranch while a team of executives presented their latest offer. The number displayed on the screen made the room feel unusually quiet. $100 million. For a moment, nobody spoke. I thought about the years behind that number. The sleepless nights. The sacrifices. The risks. The promises made beside 2 cribs in a dark nursery. This wasn't just a business deal. It was proof that refusing to quit had mattered. The executives gave me time to think. Over the following weeks, I met with financial advisors, attorneys, and trusted mentors. Most people assumed the decision would be easy. It wasn't. The ranch had become part of our family's story. Selling meant letting go of something deeply personal. One evening, I sat on the porch with Noah and Lily. They were teenagers now, old enough to understand what was happening. "What would Mom think?" Lily asked softly. The question stayed with me. After a long pause, I smiled. "I think she'd be proud of all of us." A few days later, I signed the agreement. The acquisition became official. News spread quickly. Business outlets covered the story. Local newspapers ran headlines. Industry publications called it one of the largest transactions in the region that year. Suddenly, everyone seemed interested in my future plans, including my parents. They called more often, sent more messages, suggested family gatherings, even hinted at discussing inheritance and long-term family wealth. I listened politely but offered very few details, because while everyone else was focused on what I had gained, my mind was focused on something entirely different. I wasn't thinking about keeping the money. I was thinking about where it should go. A few weeks later, I announced a major public event. Media outlets immediately picked up the story. The community buzzed with speculation. Nobody knew exactly what I planned to do, but I did. And when the truth was finally revealed, it would leave an entire room speechless. The night of the event arrived faster than I expected. The downtown convention center was packed. Business leaders, reporters, community organizers, and local families filled hundreds of seats. Television cameras lined the walls. Conversations echoed through the ballroom as people tried to guess what announcement had brought everyone together. At the center of it all stood a massive stage with a giant screen behind it. The twins and I arrived early. Noah adjusted his tie, while Lily checked the event schedule one final time. Both of them knew exactly what was coming. Neither had told a soul. As guests continued arriving, I noticed familiar faces throughout the crowd. Former business partners, friends, employees, neighbors, people who had supported us throughout the years. Then I spotted my parents. They were seated near the front. My mother wore a proud smile. My father looked unusually confident. They waved when they saw me. I waved back politely. Neither of them realized what kind of evening this would become. Over the past few weeks, they had become increasingly excited about the sale of the ranch. Whenever we spoke, they found ways to mention family legacy, future planning, and keeping wealth within the family. I never argued. I simply listened. Across the room, Robert and Susan sat beside the twins. The people who had actually stood beside us when life was hardest. The people who never asked for anything in return. Susan caught my eye and smiled. That simple gesture reminded me why I had made my decision. Soon the lights dimmed. The crowd settled into silence. The event host stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. He spoke about community, opportunity, and the power of helping others. Then he began sharing parts of my story. The loss of Emily, the struggle of raising twins alone, the years spent rebuilding a future. As he spoke, the room grew quiet. People listened carefully. Some nodded. Others wiped tears from their eyes. But the most important part hadn't happened yet. Finally, the host turned toward me. Please welcome tonight's guest of honor. The audience erupted into applause. I took a slow breath and walked toward the stage. And as I reached the microphone, I knew the next few minutes would change everything. I stood behind the podium and looked across the ballroom. Thousands of eyes were fixed on me. Reporters waited with notepads ready. Cameras pointed toward the stage. Near the front row sat my parents, confident, smiling, certain they were about to witness the beginning of a new chapter in our family's fortune. I adjusted the microphone. Then I began. Many years ago, I lost my wife. The room immediately fell silent. I spoke about Emily, her strength, her kindness, her love for Noah and Lily. Then I spoke about the difficult years that followed, the sleepless nights, the fear, the uncertainty, the responsibility of raising two children while trying to rebuild a shattered life. I didn't mention my parents by name. I didn't need to. During those years, I continued, I learned something important. The people who stand beside you when you have nothing are the people who truly matter. Several audience members nodded. Others listened quietly. I looked toward Robert and Susan. They smiled through tears. Then I continued. Some people offered support when they didn't have to. Some people chose compassion when it would have been easier to walk away. The room remained completely still. I could feel the anticipation building. Everyone knew a major announcement was coming. Finally, I pressed a button on the podium. The giant screen behind me lit up. A massive number appeared. $100 million. Gasps spread throughout the ballroom. The audience stared at the screen. Then they looked back at me. This, I said, represents the proceeds from the sale of our ranch. A wave of applause filled the room. But I wasn't finished. Tonight, I am announcing the creation of a foundation dedicated to helping widowed parents, struggling families, and children facing difficult circumstances. The audience erupted. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Some people stood. Others cheered. Then I delivered the final announcement. Every dollar of this $100 million will be donated to that mission. The room exploded into a standing ovation. I glanced toward my parents. The smiles had vanished. Shock covered their faces. For the first time all evening, they understood. The fortune they thought would stay in the family was about to become hope for thousands of families instead. And the audience couldn't stop applauding. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom when the event finally ended. Guests surrounded the stage. Reporters rushed to conduct interviews. Families approached to thank me for creating the foundation. For a few minutes, the atmosphere felt hopeful and uplifting. Then I saw my parents pushing through the crowd. Their expressions were completely different now. The pride was gone. So were the smiles. "Can we talk?" my father asked sharply. I nodded and followed them into a quieter hallway near the conference rooms. The moment the doors closed behind us, my mother spoke. What was that supposed to be? I looked at her calmly. The foundation announcement? You know exactly what I mean, she said. My father shook his head in disbelief. You gave away everything. Not everything. You could have secured your family's future. I almost laughed. My family's future is already secure. Neither of them liked that answer. My mother folded her arms. Family comes first. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I nodded slowly. You're right. Both of them seemed surprised. I continued. Family should come first. My father's expression softened slightly. Then I finished the sentence. Which is why I can't forget who was there when we needed help and who wasn't. The hallway became silent. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was simply telling the truth. When Emily died, I wasn't asking anyone to raise my children. I was asking for support. My mother looked away. When I was struggling, you disappeared. That isn't fair, she whispered. No, I replied. Fair would have been answering the phone. Neither of them had a response. A few seconds later, Noah and Lily joined me in the hallway. They stood quietly at my side. Not because I needed protection, but because we were a family, the kind that stayed. I looked at my parents one final time. I hope you both find peace, I said sincerely. Then I turned and walked away with my children. For years, I had wondered what I would say if this moment ever came. It turned out the truth was enough. 3 years have passed since the night I stood on that stage and announced the donation. Sometimes it still feels unreal. Not the money, not the headlines, not even the standing ovation. What feels unreal is how much life can change when people choose compassion instead of convenience. The foundation started with a simple goal: help families facing the kinds of struggles that once nearly broke me. At first, we funded emergency childcare programs for single parents. Then came housing assistance for families facing financial hardship. Educational grants followed. Counseling services. Community support networks. One program became 10. 10 became 50. Soon, thousands of families were receiving help. Every month, letters arrived from people whose lives had changed because someone had been willing to give them a chance. A widowed father who kept his home. A mother who was able to finish college. Grandparents raising grandchildren who finally received support. Each story reminded me why the decision had been worth it. Meanwhile, Noah and Lily continued growing into remarkable young adults. Noah inherited his mother's determination. Once he set his mind on something, nothing could stop him. Lily inherited her kindness. She had a way of making people feel seen and valued, no matter who they were. Watching them become the people they were meant to be became my greatest reward. Sometimes we visited foundation events together. They met families who had received assistance and listened to their stories. More than once, I caught them quietly volunteering without being asked. In those moments, I saw Emily in both of them, and I smiled. Robert and Susan remained a constant part of our lives. The twins still call them almost every week. They attended birthdays, graduations, and every important milestone along the way. They never viewed helping us as a sacrifice. They viewed it as love. My parents remained distant. Occasionally, I would hear updates through mutual acquaintances. But the anger I once carried had long since disappeared. Holding on to bitterness would only have given the past more power than it deserved. Instead, I focused on the people who chose to stay. One Saturday morning, years after everything changed, I sat on the balcony of my home drinking coffee while Lake Michigan stretched across the horizon. My phone buzzed. A message from Noah and Lily appeared. Breakfast downstairs. Hurry up, Dad. You're buying. I laughed. Some things never changed. As I stood and grabbed my keys, I looked around the quiet home we had built together. No secret regrets. No unfinished battles. Just peace. My parents once believed wealth would be the greatest thing I ever gained. They were wrong. The greatest thing I gained was discovering who stood beside me when I had nothing. Because money can build a future. Success can create opportunities. But loyalty, love, and family, the kind that stays when life falls apart, those things are priceless. And in the end, that became the real legacy of our story.